Hello, beautiful soul. In this video, I'm going to speak about the power that we're actually holding ourselves in when we are people pleasing. And very often when we're thinking about this, we feel like we're not being our powerful self. But the truth behind it all is that we are always powerful. It's just our way of directing that can get a little bit skewed through our conditioning, through our need to be a certain way. And this is what I want to speak to in this video. So in the energy of me releasing myself from aspects of conditioned self, so that I can embody even more of my soul identity, my original self. This is me placing another stake in the ground to speak about people pleasing. And I'll also give an example of a recent client that I've been working with and her journey with a new realization of people pleasing. So it can be very obvious sometimes when we are people pleasing, quote unquote. It can be us bending to how other people are so that the environment that we are in stays a certain way, so that we can quite unconsciously at times to ourselves be the one who's trying to control the emotional outcome or the action outcome of another person, and therefore we will feel a certain way about that. We won't have big emotions to deal with from this person or whatever it might be. But when we've gone through a certain level of self-development, when we have done the work, when we have great self-awareness, it can show up in ways that are a little bit less obvious, shall we say. So from my own example, from my own discovery of what's been going on with certain aspects of myself, what I've really come to realize is, and this is in relation to business, and this is in relation to me sharing how I want to speak about things, sharing about how I work with people, sharing about my contemplations and how I see things from my current state of being or my current level of consciousness, shall we say. And the thing that's become very obvious for me in this people-pleasing realm, and it's not even a phrase that I like anyway, so that in itself says a lot, but what I've really noticed, and it's become quite prominent it's probably always been there, but it's become quite prominent over the last maybe 6 months or so, is that there's certain people that I follow, and I really like how they speak about things. I like the orientation with which they are looking at, being full human or being outside of conditioning or whatever it is that we might say, being their original self and how that is possible. But what I've really began to notice is how I've been holding myself back, because some part of me creates a story that if I share the way I want to share, if I speak the way I want to speak, if I speak from the level of knowing that I am at, that certain people in this realm of living as original self, living as full self, whatever it might be, will say that I am wrong, will say that I am lying or leading people astray. Now, there is no basis to these thoughts. There is no basis to this story. But yet this way of thinking and therefore feeling and therefore all of that generating a action response, meaning that I don't in certain ways, is what I'm discovering and what I have discovered. It's actually me people pleasing, if we're using that term, so that I quote unquote control how they respond to me, even though they might never respond to me. And this is where the really interesting part of this comes in, especially around people pleasing, is that when we're doing that, we are holding ourselves at the level of power that we think we are capable of, or believe we are capable of. And this is coming back to what I already said of our power, our true power is always available to us. It's just we may not realize the depth of it or the filters that we have placed around it. So when we are people pleasing, when we are acting, behaving, feeling, thinking in a certain way so that other people will not have a response that we think they may have, or a response that that they have had before, this is where we are holding ourselves in our power. But we are holding ourselves in a power that, instead of it being the full bandwidth, it's this micro little bandwidth of what is available to us. And so when we come to this realization, we come to a realization of choice of, am I going to choose to continue to live at this level of my power? Or am I going to discover what actually happens when I expand my full being into this full bandwidth of my true power, my power that comes from soul, my power that is my original self, where there is no distortion, there is no conditions, there is nothing that can truly impact that power in the way that our mind thinks it can. And to bring the example in of this recent client that I've been working with, she's a very successful woman, loves the work that she does, has children that she's in love with, and, has great relationship and great relationships in her life. Very self-aware, has done the work. And in a conversation we had is that sometimes self-awareness, too much self-awareness, can become its own cage, because we are thinking of, I have all this awareness, I know what's going on, and yet this is still happening. What is wrong with me? And part of what we discovered in our conversations and in sessions that we've had is that there's two people in particular in her life that she felt the need to please all the time. She had done a lot of work before we had met to really unravel people pleasing with, say, her children or people she worked with, or things like that, and had really overcome that, and it just wasn't what she was doing anymore. But with these two people in her life, she would bend herself into a pretzel to ensure that she said what needed to be said, did what needed to be done, so that these two particular people, who were in very different areas of her life, would behave a certain way, would respond a certain way, so she didn't have to deal with the fallout of their emotional response to that, or their actions of that, or whatever it might be. And then through our conversation, she was able to come to the realization of what was actually going on. Her trying to control the outcome, trying to control these people, thinking she was pleasing them. But what she was actually doing was controlling them and holding herself at a level of power that she knew in her very bones was not the truth of who she is. And so through her being able to At the start of one of the conversations that we were having about one particular person, I invited her to imagine in her mind saying exactly, while she was standing in her power, being in her power, whatever way you want to say that, saying exactly what she wanted to say to one of these particular people. And I could see it in her face straight away. She's like, there's no point. He'll do this, he'll do that, then I'll have to do this, then I'll have to do that. There's no point, I've tried before. All of that. And by the end of our time together, by the end of that session, she had managed to raise herself out of, or we had worked together to raise her out of this level of consciousness, this way of thinking. And in doing that, she was able to place herself back into the full bandwidth of her power, to know that she is the one who directs things. She is the one who influences her field. And before I even got a chance to ask her again, she closed her eyes and she was able to see herself have the conversation, knowing that it was not and is not her responsibility as to how this other person will respond. And knowing that she, in her power, will be able to navigate any way that that person responds. And so really, when we are people pleasing, though we are in our power, we are disempowering ourselves, but we're also disempowering the other person. And for those who are on a certain path of life, whose one of the main intentions or goals or desires is to be powerful, not over people, but powerful within ourselves, so that we are aligned with soul, aligned with higher self, or aligned with original self, or whatever way you want to say that, so that you are the source of who you are being. This is such an important thing to look at. And it can be very, very nuanced, very, very, not always that easy to see. And it can take great courage to actually look at that, because it can be very uncomfortable. It can be one of the final threads of that people-pleasing thing, especially as women, that we do because we were taught to do it, because we are. Anyway, won't go into that thread of thought. But is there an aspect of your life, is there somewhere in you that you see that you're holding yourself back in the hopes of people pleasing, making others feel better, but at the same time limiting the bandwidth of your power in the process? I'd love to hear from you. Is there an area? Tell me about it. Is there an area that you completely shifted because you opened up into your full bandwidth of power? This is what Ignited Soul Living is about. Knowing who you are in the full bandwidth of your power and living your life from that place. I'll see you next time. Thank you.